no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SHIP. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another 2 hours of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com. You know, we don't have a guest until the top of the second hour, so plenty of time to get to your phone calls. You know, our guest today is Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute, so it should be a lively discussion. He's a good guy, and he'll be up at the top of the next hour. But in the meantime, 855-4-SCHIFF if you want to join the program. First up, again, a look at the markets, and the volatility continues as I speak. The Dow is up 163 points. I mean, you're getting these type of moves every single day. In fact, I just learned this morning that, you know, last month, August, was the worst August in 10 years for the stock market. So far, September is off to the worst start ever in the history of the stock market, at least as far back as the records go. So we'll see if we can reverse some of that. Although the real action is over in the precious metals market. Gold, I'm looking at the ETF GLD, is down $70, actually more than $70. That is the biggest down opening I've seen in the price of gold in the bull market. Right off the bat, down 70. But again, the gold stocks are down, but not nearly as much percentage-wise. Gold stocks are down 2.6%, whereas the gold itself is down 3.5%, actually almost 4%, 3.9%. So again, this is the continuation of the outperformance of mining stocks over the metal, which I have been commenting on for the past several weeks, and as evidence, in my opinion, that we're moving into a more powerful leg of the bull market, despite some of these more violent down moves, which are typical of a bull market where we're trying to shake off some of the weaker players. The dollar, of course, is down following the pattern of inverse relationship between dollar and the stock market, although the dollar has not lost all of its gains from yesterday. It's given up approximately half of what it gained yesterday. The biggest gainers are the commodity currencies, New Zealand dollar, Aussie dollar. The euro is up, but only a little bit, and the Swiss franc, too, is barely recovering from its record collapse yesterday. And again, you know, there is a lot of media attention being paid to the drop in the Swiss franc, and I read a lot of articles where you've got all these corporations in Switzerland are heralding this move by the Swiss government to debase the Swiss franc. And, of course, the reason that a lot of these exporting executives like this is a weaker Swiss franc lowers the bar for them. Because remember, executives are judged by the profits. So in a Swiss company, the profits are how many Swiss francs that you earn. Now, if you make the Swiss franc less valuable, well, it's easier to earn more of them. But what really counts to the shareholders is not how many Swiss francs their corporations earn, but how much the shareholders can buy. What goods and services can Swiss shareholders buy with the Swiss francs that their companies are earning? Now, if, let's say, hypothetically, the Swiss franc were to gain 30% in value in a given year, and as a result, a Swiss corporation saw a 10% decline in its earnings, the shareholders would actually be better off, because even though they earned fewer Swiss francs, those fewer Swiss francs would translate into more things, more stuff that the shareholders could buy with their dividends, or if they cashed in their shares with the proceeds, they can buy more cars, they can take more vacations, they can buy more computers, they can buy more television sets, they can buy more clothing, they can buy more stuff, which is what, after all, what you want. You don't own a stock because you want the stock. You want the stuff you can buy with the dividend income and the capital gains. And if a strengthening Swiss franc means you can buy more stuff, even if you earn fewer francs, you're better off. But let's say that the Swiss franc loses 20% of its value, and Swiss companies report a 10% increase in their Swiss franc profits. So now the executive looks like he's done a good job because he's increased the profits by 10%. But if the franc has lost 20% of value, the shareholders are not better off because even though they have more francs, they need even more francs to buy the stuff that they want. So either they end up with less stuff. So, but what the executives are judged on for their success is not the real purchasing power delivered to the shareholders, but simply the number of Swiss francs. So by weakening the Swiss francs, it makes it easier for the executives at these companies to look like they're doing a better job. So those are the ones that are applauding the decision of the Swiss bank to reduce the value of the Swiss currency. In fact, for all practical purposes, for the short run anyway, because I think eventually the Swiss are going to abandon this ridiculous policy. In fact, they'll probably be the first nation to leave the Eurozone because they're now unofficially a part of it. But, of course, since they still have the Swiss franc, it's much easier to get out of it than countries that have already gotten rid of their currency and now have the euro. But in the short run, hey, if you live in Switzerland, hey, you might as well be in Germany. You got Swiss francs in the bank, you might as well have euros. So if you're sitting there in Switzerland and you were like saying, oh, we dodged a bullet there by not joining the euro. Gee, I'm glad that we kept our independence. I'm glad my money is in Swiss francs. Hey, your money's in euros now. So now the Swiss are going to have to be looking for a safe haven, and I think they'll find it in gold, despite the fact that it is down $70 today, 75 now on the GLD ETF. You know, I think the big news today, or what we're going to be watching, is going to be the Republican debates that are going to go on tonight over at the Reagan Library. Of course, what I'm interested in is how the media is going to figure out new ways to ignore Ron Paul. You know, it's funny. Over the weekend, I was watching ABC News, the morning show with Christina Amanpour. And again, I watched ABC News last night. And in both of these news shows, they did a report on the Republican primary, and they wanted to show the polls and the front runner. So they showed three people, Rick Perry, Mitt Romney, and Michelle Bachmann, and they referenced how they were doing in particular polls. But the interesting thing was, in both cases, both the ABC This Week show and last night Evening News, the polls that they cited and that they were reporting on had Ron Paul in third place and Michelle Bachmann in fourth place. Yet, when they covered the polls, they only showed three photographs, Perry, Romney, and Michelle Bachmann, and they put up Michelle Bachmann's poll numbers. Last night on ABC, they showed that Michelle Bachmann was at 8%, and they commented on the fact that she had fallen in the polls to just 8%. Yet they completely ignored the person who she had dropped behind. Ron Paul, in the identical poll, was at 9%. So if you're going to show the three front runners, why would you skip over the guy who's in third place, pretend he's not even there, and then cover the person who's in fourth place? You know, it was on the Daily Show, Jon Stewart said, you know, he called Ron Paul the 13th floor in politics, like in a hotel when they go from the 12th floor to the 14th floor, they skip 13. Well, that's what they're doing with Ron Paul. He was in third place. They pretended he wasn't there and went right to the first place person, Michelle Bachmann. Anyway, we got a lot more coming up after the break. Stick around. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America. We're sorry. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Anyway, getting back to Ron Paul and the presidential debates, you know, it should be very interesting tonight. You know, the debate is at the Reagan Library in California, and there is a brewing controversy, and I hope it becomes a much bigger controversy, between Ron Paul and Rick Perry. Ron Paul recently ran an ad. You can see the ad up on YouTube. I think it's a great ad. I really liked it. And the ad compares and contrasts Ron Paul's support for Ronald Reagan when he ran for president in the primary in 1980. In fact, Ron Paul was one of only four Republicans to endorse Ronald Reagan in that primary. Contrasting that to Rick Perry's 1988 support for Al Gore in the 1988 Democratic primary. Of course, Al Gore did not win. It was Michael Dukakis that won and went on to be defeated by George Bush Sr. But it's interesting, and so Ron Paul calls him Al Gore's cheerleader. Of course, Al Gore is a pretty polarizing, unpopular figure, I would imagine, within the Republican Party. And so to tie Rick Perry to Al Gore, I think, is a good strategy. Now, of course, Rick Perry, I think, is making the mistake of trying to say, hey, wait a minute. Ron Paul wasn't a Ronald Reagan fan. Here's his letter of resignation in 1987, where he resigned from the Republican Party, criticizing Ronald Reagan. So he disavowed himself. He so disliked Ronald Reagan that he dropped out. He left the Republican Party. And, of course, in 1988, that was when Ron Paul, the following year, he ran in that Dukakis Bush race. He ran for president as the Libertarian nominee. Now, let's examine this strategy and how I think it could backfire and really help Ron Paul. And first of all, I was a big Ronald Reagan supporter myself in 1980. I was in high school. I wasn't old enough to vote for him, but I was a big supporter. And as everybody knows, when I talked about it when I ran for Senate, I had a poster, a life-size poster of Ronald Reagan in a cowboy outfit with a gun and a hat on in my dorm room freshman year at Berkeley in 1981. I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1984. That was the first vote I ever cast in a presidential election. But in 1988, I voted for Ron Paul. And I've been a Ron Paul supporter ever since, despite the fact that I supported Reagan in 1980, but Ron Paul in 1988. Now, why? Why was I such a proponent of Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 84, but why did I get disingenuous with him, or just, why did I lose trust, and why did I leave the Republican Party myself and vote for Ron Paul? Well, for the same reasons as Ron Paul. Ron Paul was an early supporter of Ronald Reagan when very few people supported him, because Ronald Reagan really stood for shrinking government, cutting government spending, lowering taxes, reducing deficits, all the things that Ron Paul is still for, and all the things that the Republican Party claims to be for. So Ron Paul was for all these things before it became fashionable. Now, what happened? By 1987, Ron Paul was upset. He was discouraged by the fact that Ronald Reagan had not kept his word on shrinking government, that government had grown dramatically during those 8 years, that the debts had grown dramatically, that regulations were more numerous, that, in other words, Ronald Reagan, the president, was not Ronald Reagan, the candidate. He was not able to achieve what he set out to achieve. And Ron Paul basically commented that if we can't get small government with a guy like Reagan, a guy that is so committed to that ideology, if the Republican Party with Reagan as president cannot shrink government, cannot reduce deficit spending, then what help do we have? What hope do we have in the Republican Party? So Ron Paul did the only honorable thing that he could. He left the party and decided to see if maybe he can make a difference as a libertarian. Now, what that shows is that he is a man of principle, not a man of party. He's not a party hack. He's not going to support his party right or wrong. If the Republican Party does wrong, Ron Paul has proven he will criticize it. And that is the type of candidate that we need heading the Republican ticket in 2012, not a hack. Not somebody who is just going to blindly cheerlead the party simply because they happen to be a member of it. Ron Paul had integrity. And what we need for somebody to win and beat Barack Obama in 2012 is somebody who can rise above both the Democrats and the Republicans and blame the mess we're in on both parties. And And Ron Paul is the one guy that can prove he can do it. And the fact that he resigned from the Republican Party in disgust in 1987 because we couldn't shrink government shows he's a principled man. Now, why did he come back to the Republican Party? Because he, as a pragmatist, he learned that, he tried the Libertarian Party, but because of the way the system is so rigged against third parties, that Ron Paul couldn't make a difference as a Libertarian. He tried, but he couldn't make a difference. So then he came back to the Republican Party to try to change it for the better, to try to do what he couldn't do as a Libertarian, to go back to the Republican Party. And you know what? The field today shows that Ron Paul has succeeded. He has succeeded in moving the needle in the Republican Party. He has moved the Libertarian Party more towards a libertarian ideology. And that is a success that Ron Paul has. Look at all the other candidates talking about monetary policy, talking about the Constitution, talking about the Federal Reserve. Ron Paul is the guy that led the way. He showed them the way to those concepts. So he's a man of integrity. He's a practical man. He's a pragmatist. He is doing everything he can to try to help the country. And I think to the extent that Rick Perry tries to use the fact that he criticized Ronald Reagan for not living up to his campaign promises, for growing government instead of shrinking it, for increasing the deficits instead of reducing it, that is going to play very well for Ron Paul, especially if it means that he gets some publicity, right? Because that's what he needs. He needs to be in the news. And if this ad brings him more media attention, then it's great. And, if you want to read something spectacular, read Ron Paul's 1987 resignation letter from the Republican Party. It's a beautifully written letter, and it really shows the integrity that Ron Paul has and how long he has been committed to these principles. He is not a Johnny-come-lately. He is not putting his finger in the wind and seeing how it's blowing. He was a Tea Party of one before the Tea Party existed. So this, I think, is only going to help Ron Paul. I think that's a great ad that he has. You can see it again on YouTube. And if Ron Paul can run this ad in New Hampshire, run this ad in Iowa, I think it's going to take a dent into Rick Perry, put him on the defensive, make him explain his evolution when he can say, yes, I used to be a Democrat and a big Al Gore fan, and I finally became a Republican when it was convenient. But Ron Paul can show that he's always been a Republican. He was a Republican early, supporting Ron Paul, and when the Republican Party when he supported Ronald Reagan, and when the Republican Party abandoned the principles that Reagan ran on, then he left the party to try to do something as a libertarian. And when he couldn't do that because the deck was so stacked against third parties, he went back to the Republican Party to try to change it from within. And you know what? He is succeeding. And now is his time, and it would be great to see him as president again. I voted for him once before when he ran as a libertarian. I would love to vote for him running as a Republican. Anyway, stick around. We will be back. When we come back, I want to talk about California. As if unemployment was not bad enough, they're about to pass one of the stupidest job-killing laws ever, which really proves how government regulation destroys jobs. And I'm going to discuss that and take your phone calls as soon as we get back from this break. So stick around. You're listening to Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Real Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
We really are living in the twilight zone of politics. I mean, here, I just finished talking about this fact, and if you were paying attention to the commercials, and of course I hope you are, we all need to listen to the commercials on the Peter Schiff Show and support our sponsors. But anyway, during the commercial break, they ran a report on tonight's presidential debates. And what did the report say? It said that Rick Perry and Rick Perry And, why am I blanking on names? But anyway, I hate when this happens to my mind. But no, Rick Perry and Mitt Romney. I don't know why, all of a sudden I couldn't think of Mitt Romney's name. But anyway, Rick Perry and Mitt Romney it said Rick Perry and Mitt Romney are the front runners, and Michelle Bachmann is trying to improve her third place position. She's not in third place. None of the polls have her in third place. She's in fourth place. Fourth place. The person who's in third place is Ron Paul. Yet they don't even mention Ron Paul, and they just somehow elevate Michelle Bachmann to third place so they can mention her and ignore reporting on the guy who is actually in third place, which is Ron Paul. But anyway, it should be a very interesting debate, which I am going to be watching this evening and then commenting on the show tomorrow. So if you watch the show and you want to weigh in, make sure and give us a call. But anyway, before the break, I talked about this California law, which I think is a perfect example of how government regulation destroys jobs, literally destroys them. Here is what California wants to do. And it's already passed the House, and apparently it's going to sail through the Senate and going to get signed. And it's basically the pretense of the bill is to protect domestic workers, child care, nannies, babysitters from being exploited by their employers, who are basically the parents who are hiring them to watch their kids. And what the law requires is, it requires that all babysitters be paid minimum wage, but not only that, that the employer documents all of the time that they work and quarterly give a comprehensive report with time chart, exactly how many hours they worked, their taxes, they have to give them overtime if they're entitled to it. Also, the law requires that the babysitters be given 15 minutes break for every 4 hours they work. They need a 15-minute break. And it's a minimum of 3.5 hours. So if you hire a babysitter for 3.5 hours, they need to have a 15-minute break. Also, if they work at least 5 hours, they need a half-hour break to have a meal. And, of course, if you don't provide them with all the break time and with the meal time, of course, there was initially language in that required 1 hour of paid vacation time for every 30 hours of work time. They took that out. But basically, it says that if you don't give them everything you want, you can be sued. And here's what the law says. Failure to abide by any of these provisions may result in a legal cause of action against the employer, including cumulative penalties, attorney's fees, legal costs, expenses associated with hiring expert witnesses, an unprecedented measure of legal recourse provided no other class of workers. In other words, if you hire a babysitter, watch out, because you have now opened yourself up to one hell of an expensive lawsuit if you don't abide by each and every provision of this rather lengthy law. But now let's think about the practical repercussions. I mean, first of all, why does a babysitter need a 10-minute break anyway? I mean, I was a babysitter when I was young. Of course, this wouldn't apply to me because I babysat when I was under age 18. So people who are under the age of 18 are exempt from the law, as well as immediate family members, which means siblings or grandparents. But what did I do as a babysitter? I would show up at somebody's house. Generally, the kid that I was babysitting was already asleep. I mean, nobody really let me babysit an infant when I was 13 or 14, but I don't know. I watched kids once in a while in apartment buildings. I was living with my friends and my mom. And so I would go there. The kids would be asleep. What did I do all day? I raided the refrigerator. I watched television. I mean, that was basically it. I talked on the phone. That's all I did. I didn't do any work. I was just there in case the kid woke up and, there was a problem. And I would call the parents. They would tell me, they didn't have cell phones back then, but they would tell me, here's the restaurant and here's the name of the police and here's the hospital. And I was there in case there was a problem. And, the whole thing was a break. What, I need a break from taking a break? What is someone going to do? So let's say you're a babysitter and you're watching a kid and you're there for 4 hours, and now it requires that you have a 10-minute break. What are you going to do on your 10-minute break? You can't go anywhere. You're going to get in your car and drive away because, where are you going to go? You got to be back in 10 minutes. So the break that you're going to have, you're just going to stay in the house. So I'm watching television, I'm watching a movie, and somehow during that movie, I'm supposed to sit there and watch the same movie, but call it a break, where I'm not technically responsible in case the kid happens to wake up. So, and again, the same thing with a meal. I mean, the parents leave the food. The food is there. You eat whatever you want when you're babysitting. You can have whatever's in the refrigerator, whatever in the cabinet. You're not gonna go and drive to a restaurant for a half an hour. How are you gonna do that? No one's gonna do that. You're gonna eat at the house. I mean, you don't need a break. But what does this mean? If you actually have to give them a break, that means you can't just hire one babysitter. You have to hire two, because you have to hire somebody to cover the break time. And you can't hire somebody, you can't hire a babysitter and say, hey, I want you to drive to my house and stay there for 10 minutes and then go back. You're not going to be able to hire somebody to work for 10 minutes. They're not going to be available to you. I mean, you're going to have to pay them to drive there to get, I mean, it's impossible. So you're going to have to hire two babysitters. And, of course, that means it's going to double the cost, double the paperwork. No one is going to do that. So what is the practical effect of requiring all this onerous regulatory burden on parents who want to hire babysitters? What is it going to do? Well, it's basically going to destroy the job of babysitter for the people who need it the most. Most people who are babysitting are college kids, right, who need some extra money, or maybe retired people who are trying to supplement their Social Security. What this means is if you're a college kid or you're, retired, you can't babysit. It's done. You're never going to get a job babysitting because it's just too expensive. There's too much risk. So what's going to happen? Well, parents might hire high school kids to watch their kids, 15, 16-year-olds. Of course, a lot of them can't drive, so now it's a bigger burden because now the parents have to pick them up and drop them off. And, of course, they're not quite as experienced and not quite as responsible, so the quality of child care is going to go down because you have to hire teenagers. You can't hire, 20, 21, 22-year-olds to watch your kid. And, of course, what about during the day? Because you can't hire a 16-year-old to watch your kid during the day because he's in school. So how is this going to impact daycare? Because now, of course, if you had a stay-at-home nanny and you went to work, obviously you're at work 8 hours. That's going to require a couple of breaks, a meal break. So you need to hire a second sitter. So what are you going to do? Well, you can't hire anybody. So basically, either you take your kid to a daycare center, and that's another beneficiary of this bill. It doesn't benefit the people that it purports to help. It destroys their employment opportunities. What it means is that now a parent will have to take their kid to an institution, a daycare center. But again, now you got to drive them to the daycare center. You got to pick them back up from the daycare center. And for a lot of parents, they're just going to decide, I'm not even going to work because I'll just stay at home and watch my own kid, because I can't afford the now elevated cost of child care. That's another reason to sit back and collect unemployment benefits, because then you don't have to pick up all these higher child care costs. I mean, even think about the average couple. They work hard. They might want to go out on a Friday night to dinner and a movie, maybe go to a party. Can't do it anymore. I mean, maybe you want to leave your kids alone. If you can't afford a sitter. Now you might think, well, I can hire somebody for 3.5 hours, and at least I won't have to give them a break. But I still have to keep a detailed inventory and record. You got to give them a time card, but they got to punch in and out, and you got to keep track of every day because you have to give them these quarterly updates on their hours worked and whatever they might have qualified for in benefits. But how can you even take a chance? I mean, what if you think, okay, the movie is 2 hours. We're going to quickly have dinner for an hour. It's going to take 15 minutes. We're going to get back within 3.5 hours. So I only need one babysitter. What if you get stuck in traffic? What if you're not back for 3 hours and 45 minutes? You're going to get a lawsuit. Hey, you had a babysitter for 3 hours and 45 minutes without anyone to cover them for their 10-minute break. I mean, this whole thing is ridiculous. But what does it show? It shows, because this is on a small scale, what I've been talking about on a bigger scale, because now the average California family is going to feel what it's like to be an employer, to incur the wrath of the government because they made the mistake of offering a job to a fellow citizen. Because if someone in California offers somebody who might need a little extra income a job, they're going to have all sorts of responsibilities, and they're going to open up a whole can of worms. They're gonna hold themselves potentially liable for all sorts of lawsuits. This whole thing is a disaster. And think about it. California's already got 12% unemployment. Do they really need to do this? Do they really need to destroy supplemental income opportunities for the elderly and for college kids who are struggling with high tuitions and these student loans? And of course, it's not only child care; it's care for the elderly. Let's say you're working and your elderly parents are staying with you, and they need some care. They need some care while you're at work. Well, you know what? You can't hire anybody anymore. So what do you have to do with your mom? You got to put them into an institution, maybe put them into an old age home, because now you can't afford to hire somebody to stay with your elderly parents when you're out at work because it's too expensive and you don't want to risk getting a lawsuit. Anyway, this whole thing is insane. I think I spent a little bit more time on this topic than I intended. I was trying to take some calls. So I know we got a lot of people on hold. Stick around. I'll take your calls as soon as we get back from this break. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
Yeah, I've just been sitting here on the break thinking about how good it is that the state of California is out there to try to protect all of these overworked babysitters. Because, I remarked that I babysat when I was a kid, but there wasn't nearly as much fun stuff to do. I mean, back then there were no video games. We didn't have DVD players. We didn't have the internet. So there's all sorts of fun things for babysitters to do while the kids are asleep and they're waiting for the parents to come home. I mean, they really need to have a break from all that fun that they have babysitting. In fact, a lot of the babysitters end up having the friends over, especially if you babysit at a really cool house where they have, a bigger flat plasma TV than you have, or a better movie selection, or maybe a faster internet connection. I mean, a lot of, it's a lot of the college kids probably, enjoy being at the house of the sitter rather than in their own cramped dorm room or a small apartment. But also I didn't even comment on the secondary effects of this. What about the fact that the restaurants are not going to do as much business now because, hey, parents can't afford to eat out anymore because they can't afford a sitter. Anyway, you can connect all the dots and look at all the unintended consequences. But the one thing in particular is that the people who will be hurt the most by this law are, number one, the people who are currently working as babysitters, college students and older people. They'll be hurt the most. And then number two will be the parents who used to employ them and now can no longer afford it, so don't have as much time to go out and enjoy their lives because they're stuck at home because they can't go out to a restaurant, they can't go out to the movies, they can't go out to a party because they're not allowed to hire babysitters. Anyway, let me go and grab a few calls. First up is Brian calling from Atlanta, Georgia. Brian, you're on.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Good.
Just quickly on the California thing that you mentioned, I just saw there was a USC poll that the LA Times published that 75% of the California residents think the nation's headed in the wrong direction, and yet they continue to try and do things to push it even further into that direction. It just seems to me that people are completely clueless as to what the problems are.
Yeah, I think they understand we're headed in the wrong direction economically, but they think the solution is more government.
Yeah,
and they don't understand that the reason we're going in the wrong direction is because of too much government. And so if they don't like the direction, they need to change the policies. They just can't double down on the policies and assume that we're going to change direction.
I think it's 100% right, and that's why I think there's almost no hope, because you got to re-educate literally hundreds of millions of people on these fundamental understandings. I just don't know if that's possible.
Well, I think one of the positives aspects of this California, babysitter law was it'll show a lot of Democrats how difficult it is to be an employer, because now for the first time, see, a lot of people, the only people they employ is a babysitter. They don't employ anybody else, and now they're going to get a little taste of what employers actually have to go through. all the paperwork and all the legal liability that they're going to have to now assume because they have hired somebody. And so, again, most people will simply just say, you know what, I'm not going to hire anybody. And now they'll get a little taste of what's going on.
That's a good point. Let's hope that's what comes of it. You know, you mentioned that people would have to, hire a second babysitter to avoid these kind of things. They're going to get sued by the same people who want to demonize and vilify and sue Walmart for doing exactly the same thing, hiring people part-time so they don't have to pay the government extortion on the full-time employment.
Well, it's not even about part-time. You actually have to hire 2 babysitters because you have to have a babysitter there to cover the other babysitter during their break time. So if you're going to be away for 4 hours, you need 2 babysitters because during that 4-hour time period, the one babysitter needs a break. And technically that would mean that they were not responsible for your kids during that 10 minutes, which would mean somebody else would have to relieve them. And if you couldn't prove that, that babysitter could sue you. So since you can't hire somebody just for 10 minutes, I mean, who's going to work, if you're paying somebody $10 an hour, so what's 10 minutes, $2? I mean, is somebody going to really drive to your house, sit there for 10 minutes and then drive back home so that they can collect $2? It's just never going to happen. So you're going to have to pay them, maybe $30 or $40. So effectively, you're going to have to hire a second babysitter, and then you're going to have to keep track of it all. And the whole thing is crazy. And could you actually believe that they actually had in the law paid vacations? You got to give your babysitter a vacation?
Yeah, Peter,
a vacation from what? Taking a vacation?
Peter, I can believe they put that in the law, and that's the sad part of it. It's just so completely absurd. But actually, the thing that I wanted to really bring up. And you've probably already seen this, but related to the guest that you have coming on later today, I don't know if I'm sure you also have heard about Jimmy Hoffa's rant about, doing what he wants to do to all these
people. I played it yesterday. I played that segment on yesterday's show.
And when I heard him say that, I thought, you know what? Why don't the employers just do that? Why don't they just help them out and take themselves out. Take themselves out of the country, take all the jobs out of the country, take all the capital out of the country, and let the unions go ahead and find out exactly.
Well, we'll talk about that with Yaron because that's, really the Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged moment.
Exactly. But what I just saw, and it couldn't have been timed better, is that Ford is just yesterday, because in the news, is going to create 5,000 new jobs in India. They're going to build they just broke ground on a $1 billion manufacturing plant in India to produce cars and engines. And they're doing it. One of the reasons they decided doing it is they don't want to deal with the unions and all this. So, I think that's great. You give Ford a bunch of bailout money to bail out these union pensions and all that stuff, and Ford takes all this money and they go to India to create more jobs in India. And so then what are these unions going to be? And it's just going to keep. It's just.
Oh, I know, and it's not like we've got it's not like there's a shortage of labor here that we have to go to India. We have got millions and millions of unemployed people who would love to have jobs working in auto plants. Why can't they? They can't because of the labor unions, and they can't because of other government rules and regulations that makes it so expensive to hire those unemployed people that they end up going to India and building the plant instead. This is what the government do-gooding. This is the unintended consequences, just like this babysitting law. They are saying that this is there to help the exploited babysitters. The babysitters are not being exploited. They got a good gig. And now they're not going to have that opportunity anymore, and because of the government is there to help them. Remember, those are the most dangerous words in the English language. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you.
I don't know what your guest is going to have to say on it, and I know that you've personally, with your businesses, you've started to do things to to make sure that you can still do business but do it profitably, and that's forced you to go outside the country. But it seems to me, and I don't want to call it a prophecy so much as just deductive logic and reasoning, that Ayn Rand was. You couldn't have called it any better.
Yeah, well, anyway, thanks for pointing that out. It's probably a good intro into my guest coming up after the break, Yaron Brooks of the Ayn Rand Institute. We will be back, and those of you who are still on hold, I will get to you as soon as we come back in the top of the second hour, or the bottom of the second hour. So stick around on hold, and everybody else stick around. Yaron Brook is a good guest. He is coming up. You're listening to Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they repossess your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4SHIFT. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. Joining me now is my guest, Yaron Brook, who is the executive director and president of the Ayn Rand Institute, which is based out in Irvine, California. Yaron, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I just spent a good chunk of the show talking about a law that is, I guess, being proposed out there in California, which will basically eliminate babysitters, at least anybody over the age of 18, from working in the profession, which is very, typical of how the government operates. I mean, the government ostensibly is out there to try to protect a certain class of individual, and then they write a law that completely backfires and harms them.
Absolutely, and in California now it has 12% unemployment, and this will only serve to increase that as businesses are moving out of the state because it's so prohibitively expensive to hire people, to fire people, to do any kind of business in the state of California.
Yeah, now I understand too. You're hosting a kind of a symposium tomorrow that's commemorating the 10th anniversary of 9/11. What is the Institute's take on what's happened to the country as a result of the events of September 11th?
Well, my view is that we misidentified the problem after 9/11. We misidentified the enemy or the cause of the events. We engaged in two futile, useless wars that have done nothing to make us more safe or more secure. We have increased the amount of surveillance on innocent Americans because, again, we're afraid of identifying, who the enemy really is. So we, instead of going after them, we go after everybody. So the country is less safe, less free, and of course, economically, it's in a disastrous situation. Very little good has happened since 9/11. In that sense, Bin Laden, is winning. He's dead, but his cause is winning.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, and I mentioned it at the time that the real success that Bin Laden has was in helping to shred what remained of the U.S. Constitution. Because of his actions, Americans lost far more individual liberty than could have possibly been lost, absent those actions. And, in fact, more damage was done to our individual liberty by Congress than by the terrorists.
Well, that's, I think, the point. I wouldn't, on that one, Bin Laden can be blamed for lots of things, but on that one, I would blame Congress and the president, not him, because the kind of threat that Bin Laden posed, in my view at least, could be dealt with swiftly, ruthlessly and thoroughly without having to violate or to impinge on the rights of Americans.
Oh, absolutely. But my point,
this should have been done. This should have been over with by now. We should have destroyed the enemy and gone on, and that's not something that happened.
No, my point, though, is really that Bin Laden provided Congress with the cover to do what they wanted to do anyway, but they lacked the catalyst. Without the threat of terrorism, they never could have convinced Americans to surrender so many rights. They never could have passed all this legislation if they didn't have that Bin Laden threat, hanging over the country.
I think you're right. I mean, whether they would have wanted to do it anyway or not, you know, it depends how evil you think those guys were. You know, but generally we agree on that one. But
I don't know if it's out of evil. A lot of these politicians just believe they're socialists. They just believe that the more power that we invest in government, the more benefits society is going to have. They look
well, you
at,
see, I think that you're kind to them. You see, I don't think the type of politician Obama and some of the people in the left in particular, I don't believe they're socialists. I think that's way too good of a word for them. Socialism actually believes that you're moving towards a better place. You're moving towards some kind of progress, human happiness, whatever. They're wrong, but they believe that. These people don't believe that. These people, are egalitarians. They're out for equality for the sake of equality. If we all suffer and if the economy goes to hell, they don't really care as long as they get their agenda passed. In that sense, they're much worse than socialists.
Yeah. So, I guess the socialists, the goal then is to spread the wealth around, but what they want to do is spread the poverty around, and just
absolutely. I mean,
we're all equally poor.
Believe at least in progress. If you remember, the old socialists, the old left, believed in industrialization. They believed in progress. They believed we'd all be better off if we were just more equal. These people know we won't be better off because they've seen socialism in action. They know we'll all be worse off because they've seen, for example, socialized medicine and how it works. But they still do it because equality is more important to them than human prosperity and human success.
Except, of course, they still value their own material comforts. A lot of the limousine liberals, as you might like to call them, they might want to. They want everybody else to suffer, but they want to somehow exempt themselves.
Well, it's always the case that kind of the elite that is going to tell us how to live our lives and what's good for us. They need their comforts in order to be able to, stay sharp enough to be able to manage our life for us. If they had to give up those comforts, how would they take care of us? So that's always the pattern in history. It goes back to Plato, the philosopher kings that rule over the people and tell them how they should behave and what professions they should have and what kind of health care they should get and what's good for them because we're just too dumb to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Now, I know you've been saying that, Ayn Rand's philosophies have been making a comeback, at least among the general population, not so much among legislatures. But
yeah.
I don't know if you heard, I'm sure you did actually, heard the Jimmy Hoffa speech the other day where, he really called on President Obama to enlist the workers in a war on the Tea Party, or more importantly, a war on employers. That the workers need to take what's theirs and take what's right, and the government needs to. I mean, it really sounded like a radical call that you might have, the cry that you might have heard in the communist revolution in the Soviet Union or China or Cuba. And really made me think of, Atlas Shrugged, and just, really wanting to see, why don't the employers just concede the war and just stop hiring completely and just take their capital and take their hard work and either retire or take it to another country and just let them win, concede.
No, that is the story of Atlas Shrugged. And, of course, if they did that, life in America would be intolerable very, very quickly. Things would deteriorate and fall apart very, very quickly, and people would hopefully would then appreciate the value of the capitalists and the managers and the CEOs and the entrepreneurs and the people who create the vast wealth in this country. Part of the challenge for them is, where do they go? That is, it's not like there's some Galt's Gulch like there is in the book where you can go and actually be free. We live in a world where almost everywhere the creators, the entrepreneurs are being oppressed.
It's all a matter of degree. There are plenty of places that people can go and be relatively freer than they are here. Anyway, we'll continue this discussion after the break. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com.
There's a man coming into town. You don't want to know that he'll be around.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
are back. We're talking with Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute. And, Yaron, it really is a matter of degree. You mentioned a lot of companies are leaving California. I mean, many of those companies are going to other states, which are certainly not completely free, but they're less oppressive than California. And, I have a company, one of my California companies, Euro Pacific Asset Management. I'm moving out of California as well, but I'm moving out of the country, too. I'm moving the business to Singapore because there's a lot more freedom over there. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we got here.
Sure, but, people weigh different parameters. I mean, what amazes me every day is how much business is staying in California and growing in California in spite of everything. So, the calculation is difficult. You can move to Singapore, but you really want to live in Singapore. There are not that many places that are attractive to live in that are freer than the United States, unfortunately. I mean, it would be wonderful if they were.
Well, California is lucky that it has such good weather. I mean, if California had bad weather, there'd be nobody there.
I agree, and it has great infrastructure. I mean, one of the reasons Silicon Valley thrives is because everybody's already there, so it's hard to leave. You create a certain economies of scale when you have all the technology companies in one place, plus Stanford University. But yeah, I know, absolutely. Economically, it does not make sense to stay in California. And economically, what's happening in the United States is completely insane, and what's happening in Europe is completely insane.
Yeah, I mean, I like California.
We're imploding.
Yeah, I lived there for a long time, and the main reason I guess I'm not moving back is because of the taxes and the regulation, and that's what's keeping me out. But ultimately, I do think that as all the jobs, more and more jobs disappear, a lot of people will have no choice. They'll have to leave California if they want to get a job.
I think you're right, and I think that things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. Because, experience doesn't really teach people, particularly politicians. Things have to get very, very bad before they enact even semblance of sane policies. And there's just no way for them to get out of this. I mean, if you think of how many dollars the state of California is underwater, and then, the pension plans in California are all bankrupt in kind of dramatic fashion. We're talking about at least $500 billion. It's gonna take massive restructuring to bring sanity back.
And the problem is, it can't just get a little bit worse. It has to get a lot worse, because when it gets a little bit worse, they just want more of the same. Like I keep hearing people, they want more stimulus because they're still convinced the last stimulus worked. Even though we're right back in the ditch, they think that, we need more of this. So it's not until it's such an abysmal failure, there's so much pain, that they might even question the fact that their cures are actually the problems.
I agree, but I don't actually think they think that. You see, again, I think they're much worse than you do. I don't think they think that the stimulus works. I think they know that the stimulus is the only way for them to gain more power, whether it works or not. I mean, these guys can't be that stupid, right? I mean, we know, and the facts of reality are that stimulus has never, ever, ever worked in the history of mankind. They always make things worse, not better. And, the empirical facts are out there for anybody who's semi-honest to discover. These people are not honest.
The problem with the stimulus is it creates the temporary illusion that things are getting better, and so people actually buy into it. But then when the illusion wears off and what's revealed is that you're in worse shape, people still don't make the connection that the effects of the stimulus were never real in the first place, and that the reason that the economy is now back in trouble is because of the secondary effects of that stimulus. But I do believe that there are a lot of people that believe in it. There are probably some people that know it's bull, and they want to get reelected, and they know that promising something for nothing is the way to do it. But probably a lot of people out in America still believe that government programs could improve their lives. And
I think many of the common people do, but the economists who preach this stuff, they know this is not true. Deep down, they do. I mean, they're ignoring the facts on purpose because it's convenient. Because challenging stimulus would challenge much of what they believe about the world, and they're not willing to actually challenge that.
But I think Yaron, I don't think it's that. I think they actually don't believe it. I think it's kind of like a cognitive dissonance. I mean, look, I went through this during the housing bubble. You know, I never had more arguments with people than when I told them that housing prices were going to go down. And these were otherwise intelligent people. And believe me, they were 100% convinced that it was impossible, that real estate prices could never fall, let alone fall by the degree to which I explained. And certainly in California, where you're living, where prices have been basically halved, and I think that people were just shutting their eyes to reality because it was the prospect of their house going down in value was so destructive to everything that they were about that they simply shut off from the possibility that that was true, and they built up a wall. And I think a lot of these economists, they don't want to repudiate their entire life's work, everything they've studied, and so they simply close their mind to any evidence that would suggest that what they believe is false, and they just believe in it like a dogma, like a religion.
I agree completely. I mean, I think that's exactly that evasion. They don't put up a cognitive wall. They don't think. And they ignore reality and they ignore facts. I don't think that's necessarily true of the common American who's just being bamboozled. But I think anybody who's a professional, anybody, and including the politicians, anybody who knows a little bit about history and a little bit of economics knows that these things, I mean, just look at Japan. You've talked about this. Just look at Japan for the last 30 years. Look at the Great Depression. These things never work. And ultimately, they only dig you into deeper and deeper holes and create a bigger and bigger mess.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is you have these glaring examples where government stimulus doesn't work, like the Great Depression, like Japan, yet the people that are proposing more stimulus cite those examples as proof that stimulus works because they claim that the Depression was the fault of laissez-faire capitalism, that we didn't have enough stimulus.
And they'll always say, well, the stimulus wasn't big enough in Japan, right? Yes, I think that's where it becomes really dishonest. These guys are trying to really fool the American people on a massive scale.
Right, but I think they've succeeded in fooling. I think they've succeeded in fooling themselves. I mean, I believe that Paul Krugman believes what he's saying. I see him on television. He seems like he's a sincere guy. He actually believes what he's saying. I don't think he's lying. I just think he's that ignorant.
I think he's lying to himself. I think he's, as you said, he's created this cognitive wall where he's ignoring stuff. But that, to me, is the worst form of lying. Ignoring facts, ignoring reality, putting yourself into these blinders. That is the worst form of dishonesty.
But I think it's happening on a subconscious level. I don't think he has any idea it's happening because it's his own body trying to protect himself from the ugly realization that his entire life has been a fraud, that everything he's studied has been wrong. Everything he thinks he's going to save the world with his knowledge of economics. He's condemning the world based on his lack of knowledge of economics.
Cognitively, you're right, but I cannot believe deep down he doesn't know he's full of it. The body sends you signals. When you're shutting down like that, when you're evading reality, you've got lots of signals that what you're doing is wrong and bad. And what these people do is they ignore it. Some of us change. Some of us have bad ideas at some point in life, and we look around and we see evidence to the contrary, and we stick to our guns. But after a while, we open our eyes and look at the facts and change. And these guys won't, in spite of the evidence, in spite of everything, and they know it deep down.
Yeah. I don't know. It's tough to figure it out. I mean, it's always, are they lying or are they ignorant or is it a combination of both? It's always hard to tell, but it's an interesting discussion nonetheless. Anyway, Yaron, hey, thanks a lot for coming on the show, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing in spreading the word of freedom and Ayn Rand to America, and hopefully one day we will return to those principles. Anyway, everybody else, we will be returning back to the Peter Schiff Show after this break, so stick around. I will go right back to the phones.
So when I check him, my last in hand, and if him slip, I gone with him hand.
The Peter Schiff Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and the markets are continuing to be strong. The Dow, as we speak, up 180 points, but it's not just stocks that are going up. Commodity prices are rising. Oil is up better than $3 a barrel at $89.20 per barrel. In fact, I think we're just about at the highest level for oil since August 4th, better than a 1-month high. In fact, during the last month and a half, the price of oil has held up a lot better than the stock market during this correction. And in fact, if we close at this level, I think that would constitute a breakout. I think short term that would send oil prices back up to at least $92, $93 a barrel. And if we break above there, if we close above 93, that would break a downtrend that's been in place since May, where oil prices touched $113 a barrel. And we break that downtrend, I think we're going right back above 100. I think oil could easily be back above 100 before the stock market gets anywhere near where it was the last time oil prices were at 100. Also, metals are still under pressure, but they are rising. Silver near the high of the day, down just 80 cents. Gold now down just under $60, having been down over 75 earlier in the day. And the gold stocks have cut their losses in half. Gold stocks now only down 1%, even though gold prices are down 3 1/3%. In fact, there are several gold companies that are already in the green on the day. Again, this outperformance continues with the mining stocks. You know, also during the break, I heard a news report that reminded me, I forgot to address this comment about the post office about to get a federal bailout. Apparently, they had a $5 billion payment that they needed to make that they didn't have the money. And they're going to get some kind of government bailout. A stopgap measure is going to be announced to keep them solvent for a few more months, and then there's going to be a bigger bailout of the post office. And, of course, there are many problems with the post office, number one being that it's government-run, and so it's completely inefficient. 90%, I think, of the costs are labor-related. It's a complete joke. But one of the other reasons that the post office is losing a lot of money is because Congress won't let them raise the price of a stamp. And the reason they won't do that is because they want to maintain the illusion there's no inflation. And if they allowed a big increase in the price of a stamp, that would be a great example of the inflation that's out there. And so they are not allowing the post office to raise the price of a stamp. Meanwhile, the cost of delivering the mail are going through the roof. Think about all the gas that all these little postal cars are using, driving all around delivering the mail. And so they're not allowing them to do that. Meanwhile, I commented before, I actually wrote a commentary on these forever stamps. The one place that the post office is taking a lot of money is by selling these forever stamps that you can use no matter how high the price of stamps ultimately goes. I think these are a ticking time bomb. They are enormous liabilities that are off the books of the post office because one day Congress is going to let them raise the price of a stamp, and then no one's going to buy any. They're simply going to use the forever stamps. And then the post office has to deliver all this mail for free because they would have already collected and spent the money, yet they haven't made any deliveries. So this is a huge accident waiting to happen. You know, one of the things that they're saying they want to do is eliminate Saturday mail delivery. They want to cut back on services. I don't know if a lot of people remember this, but, you know, at one time, not only did the post office deliver on Saturday, but they delivered twice a day. You know, back when, my father was younger, there was always two mails. There was the morning mail and the afternoon mail. In fact, if you're watching a movie, from the 1950s or even 1960s, you'll hear them talk about what's in the morning mail. Did we get the afternoon mail? The post office actually made two separate deliveries a day. So they've already dramatically cut back on service. I mean, normally in a free market, the service improves over time. The quality gets better. But in a government-run monopoly, the quality of the service is constantly diminished as the cost goes up. I mean, the post office is a glaring example of the failure of government to do anything, even something as simple as deliver the mail, yet we want to turn over the entire health care industry into the equivalent of the post office. Anyway, let me go back to the phones. Unfortunately, what happened to all my callers? I guess a lot of people lost patience and dropped out. So if you want to call back up, 855-4-SCHIFF, I'll return to the one remaining caller that I have. So it's easy. If you want to call in, we got an open board. But first up is Manuel calling from Portugal. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Mr. Schiff. Hello. I'm calling for thinking about it. I mean, I have a banking account, and it's not easy for me to withdraw the money from this bank for a few reasons. But I'm really getting scared about the banking situation in Portugal and in Europe. And I would like to, take some bullion and store it somewhere else. But I'm getting a little bit afraid of that someone is going to do something to the trading of the gold. I don't believe that they will allow it just simply to go up freely. We have seen what they have done to the Swiss franc, and I mean, we're playing with some tough people out there. What's your
Well, remember, there was a lot of pressure on Swiss politicians to weaken the currency, and of course, it's very easy for Switzerland to weaken the franc. They just print them, but you're not going to have a big constituency out there to weaken gold. And even if governments want to weaken gold, it's much more difficult because you can't print it. Yes, it's possible for some central bank to sell the gold that they have into the market, but the problem is there's so much demand, especially from other central banks, that if one central bank tried to depress the price of gold by selling it, it wouldn't even work. I mean, the gold would be quickly absorbed by the market, and the price, I think, would head higher. So while I think you do have competitive devaluations in the currency markets, I don't see it in the precious metals market. Meanwhile, gold prices have already gone up from $250 an ounce to $1,900 an ounce, and nothing has been done to impede that rise. So I don't think that if gold goes from $1,900 to $3,000, I don't think that that's going to change the dynamic. So I think if you're worried about the euro and you want to protect yourself in gold, just go ahead and do it. I mean,
I'm just afraid they're going to do something. They're going to be trade for simple people or something.
But what's the alternative? You're afraid of something they might do that they haven't done yet. But what's the alternative? I mean, you're going to lose money if you stick with your fiat currency. So I would suggest, contacting my company, Euro Pacific International, because not only can we buy gold for you, but we can store it and we can give you a MasterCard that you can use as a debit card to access your gold. So if you need to spend it, if you need to go into an ATM machine and take out some cash, or if you want to go into a store and buy something, you can pull out your Europac MasterCard and spend some of your gold.
But it's not in the U.S., is it? The company, I say.
No, it's in the Caribbean, but it's my company. Yeah, it's based out of the Caribbean. It's EuropacIntl.com is the website, and you can
just another
yourself.
Question, Mr. Schiff, please. What happens in case of a failure of a bank, of a bankruptcy of a major bank in Europe? What happens? What do people lose in it?
Well, I am not familiar. I'm not familiar with the Portuguese banking laws. I know here in the U.S. we have deposit insurance where the government is obligated to make the depositor whole. They probably have something similar in Portugal, unfortunately. But, so chances are the depositors won't. But, what ultimately happens, though, is if you get a bunch of bank failures and the governments have to bail out the banks, where do they get the money? They create it. They print it. And so even though you still have your money, you lose a lot of your purchasing power. And that is what's more important. And so if you want to protect that, you do what you're thinking of, which is owning gold.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for the call, and glad to have people in Portugal listening to the Peter Schiff Show. Next up is Bill calling from Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peter. I'm a subscriber and a client and a fan of yours and Ron Paul's, and I heard your little talk about Ron Paul earlier, and I was disturbed the other day. There were a couple criticisms I heard of Ron Paul, and I'm wondering if you would address them for me. The first one, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, is I heard Mark Levin on the radio, and he was going on and on about Ron Paul being a nut and that he surrounds himself with people who hated Lincoln, and that if he had been in charge at that time, that he would have allowed states to secede. That was the first one. The second one was I heard Hannity the other night said he could support just about all of the conservative candidates except Ron Paul because he was really upset with the way he used Iran's getting a nuclear weapon. Apparently, Ron Paul said that it wouldn't bother him. It wouldn't.
Well, not that it wouldn't bother him, but the odds. A, they don't even have one, and B, what his point is that even if they were to develop one, what is the threat given the fact that the Soviet Union had intercontinental ballistic missiles aimed at all of our cities, and they never launched them. And so if we were able to defend ourselves against, the Soviet Union that actually could fire a missile and hit us, I mean, he's pointing out that Iran is simply not in a position to offer that type of threat, and I think he thinks that we are overplaying it, and we're spending too much money and overseas in order to defend against a threat that is really a lot smaller than what the media or what the government is making it out to be. And in that respect, he's probably right. And of course, if Iran were to develop a nuclear weapon, I'm sure Israel would do something about it very quickly without any help from the United States. I think they have more at stake than we do, and I think they're in a position where they can defend themselves. But as far as obviously Ron Paul is not an idiot. He's far from an idiot. He's about as far from an idiot as you can come. Now, does he question, and do a lot of people question, some of Lincoln's decisions with respect to the Civil War? Absolutely. I mean, the Civil War, more Americans died in the Civil War than in World War I and World War II, Vietnam, Korea combined. Tremendous loss of life. Was the Civil War really necessary? I don't think so. I think slavery would have ended even if we didn't have a Civil War, and it would have ended with a lot less bloodshed, and it would have probably been better for the United States. So anyway, if you want to hang on, I'll continue to discuss this a little bit more after the break. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Yes, we are back, and I'm talking with Bill in Pennsylvania about Ron Paul, a couple of controversial points regarding Lincoln and Iran. And going back again to the Civil War, and a lot of people believe mistakenly, and probably it's the deliberate result of our school system, that the Civil War was fought to end slavery. That's not why it was fought. It wasn't fought to end slavery. In fact, Lincoln himself said that if he could have averted the war by preserving slavery, he would have done it. In fact, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't happen until 1863. It was 2 years into the war before Lincoln freed the slaves. And one of the reasons he did that was there were rumors that the French might have intervened on the side of the South. And so in order to prevent that from happening, Lincoln wanted to turn the war into a war over slavery so that the French would then not be inclined to support the South if they turned it into a war for slavery rather than what it started out to be, which was over states' rights. And that's really how the war began, and it wasn't. And that's why, the North, there wasn't a lot of support. They actually they had the drafts. In fact, the bloodiest riots in U.S. history took place during those drafts. But the South, everybody volunteered. There was no draft in the Confederacy. People volunteered. So there were a lot of problems, but it's very unpopular when somebody comes back and criticizes what happened during that time period. It was a very dark period in American history. Clearly, we would have been better off as a nation had we ended slavery without the bloodshed of the Civil War and without a lot of the damage. The first income tax happened during the Civil War. It went away, but it came back. The first paper money happened during the Civil War. So a lot of bad precedences were started during that time period. And America would certainly be better off without them. So I do think rational people can question a lot of the decisions that were made back then. But unfortunately, the media likes to demagogue it, and somehow if you have any problem with that, with the war, that you were in favor of slavery, which clearly Ron Paul is not. Also on the Iraq comments, I had a different spin on it, and I disagree a little bit with Ron Paul on Iran. It's not a big deal for me. But yeah, I think that the U.S., if we had credible intelligence that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon, I think that the United States should do something about it. I think we could do something about it without having the massive military presence that we have today. Look, clearly, had we been able to prevent the Soviet Union from developing nuclear weapons, we should have done it. Clearly, we would have been better off if we could have avoided the Cold War. And in fact, there was a discussion. There was an opinion among many. General Patton comes to mind that, when we finished defeating the Nazis and we had our tanks and our troops in Europe to then go and go to Moscow and liberate Russia and defeat the communists, because people like General Patton understood that it wasn't just the Nazis that were our enemies, but the communists in Russia. But Truman, Truman wouldn't do it. Truman wouldn't support it. But, so I do think that we would have been better off had we nipped that in the bud. And I think that, yes, is it possible that Iran could develop a nuclear weapon and ultimately use it against us? Yes, it's possible. And if for a relatively small expenditure we could eliminate that possibility, it's something that I think is worth doing. But again, I don't think we necessarily have to do it, because I think if we don't do it, Israel will do it, and that's just as good. I mean, they're right there, and they have the capability to neutralize that threat. Anyway, is Bill still there?
One other comment, Peter, and that is...
I thought I still had the caller on the line. I guess he dropped out. But anyway, hopefully I thoroughly answered his question. Anyway, I'm moving on to Ellen calling in from New York. Ellen, you're on.
Hi, Peter. I'm a Euro-Pacific client.
Is Ellen there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Maybe we're having a problem with these callers. Let me move on to Tony in Las Vegas.
Hello?
Tony, are you there? Is anybody hearing me? All right, I'll go to Kevin in Toronto.
Cool.
Is Kevin there?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
All right. Apparently, I can't hear any of the callers. I don't know why. What is wrong with my equipment? I'm not hearing any of the callers. So I don't know what the callers are calling about. I'll try to address some of the topics. I mean, Tony in Las Vegas apparently was calling regarding decoupling. I mean, decoupling is something that I believe is going on. It's the whole concept where the rest of the world will decouple from the U.S. economy. And, the idea is, most people regard the U.S. economy as being the engine of the global economic train. I regard it as the caboose, and that's why I think the decoupling process is so advantageous for the rest of the world, because they no longer have to pull the caboose behind them. I think the world is dragging a lot of dead weight because Americans are consuming but not producing, borrowing and not saving, and our spending is not a benefit that the world enjoys. It's a burden that the world has to bear. But, of course, this whole decoupling process, there are certain factions that benefit from the status quo, that make a lot of noise, that have a lot of political connections. And so politicians are doing things to protect those interests. So the decoupling process doesn't happen quickly and automatically. It is happening over time. It is taking time. But if you look around and if you look at the emerging markets and a lot of the economies that are really the caboose, that the engine that are pulling the global economic train, their economies are doing much better than the U.S., despite the efforts of their governments to impede that progress through exchange controls and currency pegs and money printing that are trying to preserve the status quo, as opposed to recognizing that the status quo is a raw deal, right? That the world is getting ripped off in this relationship, and that by allowing the dollar to collapse, allowing their own currencies to gain in value, they no longer have to export so much because they can simply consume what they produce. Again, the reason that you export is not so you can export. You export so you can import something else. But if you're making everything yourself and you don't need to import, then why are you exporting? Why are you denying your own citizens the enjoyment of that production? Right? The Chinese would get a much more enjoyment. They'd enjoy a much higher living standard if they could keep their products rather than our paper money. Because after all, we get the products and they get our paper. But we get much more economic utilization from the products that they produce than they get for the money from the money that we print. In fact, what do they do with the money that we print? They just stack it up. They just store it and they use it to buy treasuries. And we pay them interest and they buy more treasuries. And now they've got a mountain that would reach up into the heavens of all this paper money. Meanwhile, we're enjoying all this stuff. We're wearing their clothes. We're using their electronics. We're sitting in their furniture. We're getting a lot of use, a lot of economic utility out of the things that they're giving us, but they're not getting the same enjoyment out of the things that we give them. In fact, if they stopped trading, if they kept their stuff, then they would get all the enjoyment, and we would get our own inflation. Anyway, that's it. I apologize for the technical difficulties that screwed up the calls here at the end of the show. So don't forget, watch the presidential debates tonight. We will be back again tomorrow with another 2 hours of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. Bye, folks.
Take a bite out of
The Peter Schiff Show.